All right, let's take a look at the Benoni Bfd3 Signature Metal Pack. So this metal pack here, this preset and groove pack, is of course for FXpansion's BFD3. And there are 23 presets, something like 182 grooves. And they're based off of real drum kit sounds that you've heard in some produced metal records. So the first thing you'll get, which this is currently free right now, 3.26 megabytes. Unzip that, you'll get this folder right here. You'll get your little README, so you can just read about some of that stuff there. All right, then you'll get two folders. You have your signature groove folder and the signature preset folder. We'll head over here to the grooves folder first, and you'll get 5 palettes. Now, if you're in BFD3, I would highly suggest you kind of just use the palettes. It's just easier to use. But I have included the individual MIDI if you would want to use that for whatever reason. And also that means if you download this pack and you don't have BFD3, technically you could actually use these grooves. You just have to set your key map to whatever you're using to a BFD3 key map. And also it's just a little easier to sometimes just have that MIDI available without having to export it from BFD3. But there's your palettes, all right? And there's your MIDI. And then on to your presets. Now your icon will probably be different from mine. There's 23 presets. It says 46, that's because we have images. The icon you see, a notepad icon, that's because I open these up in Notepad from time to time and take a look at the actual code. But you'll probably just see just like a blank file. Image, okay? So as far as naming goes, pretty easy to figure out. These are, of course, based on real drum sounds that are out there. You can take a look at the names and try to figure those out. Of course, some of them are my custom sounds. And if you see BFD3 in the title, that preset is only using drums from BFD3. So it will only use drums from BFD3, meaning if you have BFD3, you can use every single one of these 13 in this case, BFD3 presets. All right, no expansion packs used in the ones that say BFD3 in the title. Now from there, we have the X kits. X stands for expansion or extra awesome, because the X kits, most of them, we're really using a lot of Sphere, Oblivion, and Metal Snares. And those 3 kits are just tuned perfectly for metal. Also included is 1 kit for horsepower and 1 kit for vintage recording techniques. All right, but that is what you get right there. Now, how do you get these into BFD3? There's a lot of different ways. One way for the grooves is to just put them in any folder you want. You could actually put this entire folder here. For example, I have a lot of my BFD3 stuff on this drive in the FXpansion folder. I could literally just drag that whole folder over here and then come into BFD3, tools, and set up content locations and just make sure that's added and scan that path. All right, and that's one way you could do it. You could have the grooves and presets like that. Another thing you could do would be to put them in the user folder, which will be documents, and then FXpansion right there, BFD3, and then grooves. So then I could just grab the grooves here, just highlight all of them and drag them over here. But they're already there, so I wouldn't want to do that. Go to presets folder. And then again, documents, FXpansion, BFD3, presets, and then I could just drag those, everything you see here, just drag them all right into here. Okay. And that would be it. And then you would just need to come into BFD3 and then scan that path again. Just tools and set up content locations and make sure you scan everything. All right, so you can really put them anywhere you want. Your other option would be to go to File, and we could import presets or load presets from File. So you could do that. Another thing you can do for the grooves, come to grooves here, File, and then we could load grooves from File. We could do that too. All right, so a lot of ways to use these grooves and these presets. And for the grooves, you'll be able to search them out by the author. These are called BenoniStudio. I also have another pack out there, a bunch of different metal grooves and whatnot with the BenoniStudios tag. This one is tagged a little bit differently just because I felt like it. Sounds great. This is the Infire kit, which you can guess what that's based on. For the presets, those will be labeled BenoniStudio, so you can have those called up real quick too. And you don't have to go through a huge list of presets, but that is how you will use the folder that you download and actually get everything in there. Lots of ways, either putting it on any hard drive you want and just scanning the path, or by just importing them into BFD3. All right, now from there, let's go on and look at the presets, because I want you to understand how all of these are put together so you can understand this signal flow. First off, these are set up to be pretty much done. So you can just load up a preset and have your drum sound, pretty close to being done. Of course, nothing can ever be 100% done because I don't know what you're layering on top of. I don't know what guitars you're using, what tuning you're using. I don't know. And no one can never know that. So they're pretty much done. You can always adjust some things a little bit, even though the levels are set for everything to what I like personally. I always like a little more kick personally, but you can always obviously adjust the faders, adjust the volume of everything, adjust the panning, all of that stuff. Don't forget your tech and your model tab, do some damping and your bleed, and of course your ambient mic sends there. But as far as how everything is set up, right now we're in an X kit, but this will work just fine. For the kicks, most of the kicks, in fact, I think every single one has a kick that is linked to another kick. All right. So I trigger kick 1, it triggers kick 2, and I've named that trigger. All right. So this is the trigger sound. A lot of times on acoustic drums, you'll have a trigger on there, or maybe you get a sample and then you'll layer that in underneath your real recorded track. So that's the idea, is layered sounds to be a little bit more interesting. So just the trigger. And you can, of course, adjust the ratio if you want more or less of that. And most of the triggers are down tuned by around 3, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. And again, that's just to sort of fill out that low end a little bit and give it a bit of a different timbre or timbre. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, I don't actually link kick 2 to kick 1. So you can actually do some cool things if you want to set up your own grooves, which sort of brings me to another point. As far as in BFD3 and metal, a lot of metal kits use 2 kick drums. Now, whenever you're using software like BFD3, which doesn't cycle kick drums back and forth like some software does, it doesn't really make any sense to actually set up 2 of the same exact kick drum, maybe detuning one by 0.02 or something, because then it makes your programming way too hard, because then I'd have to come through here in your kick lane, program some of your kick, and then program some of the other kick down in the kick 2 lane. Makes no sense, especially if you're pulling from the same exact sample. So that's why we have things layered and we're not going back and forth. All right. So whenever you set up your own metal kits, again, if you're going to do the same exact drum, the same exact kick drum, there's no reason to do that and then make programming harder on yourself. No reason at all. You're pulling from the same exact sample. Plus, BFD3 has plenty of options in here for tuning, randomization, and whatnot, all over the place. There's no reason to do that. All right, so that's your kick. Your kick is going to be set up linked to each other. All right. So this kick and this kick trigger, and then both of them run out from there into an aux, which is the kick aux. And the reason that is so you don't have to always change the level of both of these to turn your kick down. And this is the same thing for the snare, for the ones that are layered anyway. So if I were playing, I didn't have this kick aux, I'd have to turn both of these down to turn the kick down. Makes no sense, too hard. So now you can just turn them down with one fader. All right? And that's the same way the snares work. So a lot of these sounds have layered snare sounds, for the same exact reason. This is a more complex sound. Now this snare isn't linked to this one, so you can actually do things with just that snare if you want. But our main snare is linked. If I mute that one. Mute that one. So much different together. And of course, those levels are set up and then they're sent out to the snare right here. Of course, the snare goes out to the master, the kicks go out to the master and whatnot. That just makes it easier to adjust levels for our kicks, our snares with just one fader. From there, for our snares, which are again linked together, these go out with a send to our snare reverb. And if you like these reverbs, be sure to come in here and actually save the preset. And you can always say just save preset. That way you can recall it on any kit that you create. Okay, and that holds true for any of these effects that you like here. just come in here if you like it and you want to try it on another drum that you're setting up. Right click, save the preset, name it whatever you want. I was originally going to give you all these files too, but it's just too cumbersome to expect people to know where to put everything. There are tons of effects on literally everything here. Tons. So go through and check out all those different effects. So there's our snare reverb. For the snare reverb, you just adjust the level that you want, because the snare reverb is at 100%. And the reason I just personally like a snare reverb channel, it gives you more options than putting a reverb right on a snare, for example. Like I could put it on the snares track if I wanted and then turn my mix halfway. But this just gives me more control because I can send, a full amount. Like right here, I'm sending our snares post effects. Okay, so it's going to get the full volume. It's not going to be affected by our fader level. And then I just have more control. That's personally how I like to do it. I much prefer that. That's a lot of reverb. Turn it way down. Or just turn it off or mute it. That's your reverb. All right. And of course, your hi-hat, that's just going to go out to the master for all of the toms. All right. These are, of course, set up and have EQs on every single one of them, I believe. And of course, all of these toms here come out to this tom bus right here, the tom master bus. And there, again, the same reason for that is you don't want to have to come in here if you just want to lower the sound of your toms. Well, now you have to remember, let me turn this one down by, 3 dB, turn this one down by 3 dB, this one down by 3 dB. If you want to lower everything, much easier, just lower this here and you're done. You can, of course, always adjust the ratio. But all of this comes into the tom bus, which of course goes out to the master. And then there's a send on the tom bus right there, which sends to the tom verb channel. Same concept as our snare. You can jack up the verb if you want that 80s sound. But some tom verb can sound good. You can see that right there. And of course, you can always change this around to whatever you want. And you should, by the way, you should come in here and listen to everything. If you don't like the sound of that, adjust the ratio. Maybe pull up our main kick and then adjust the trigger however you want. Of course, adjust the overall level, pop into our kicks here. If there's too much low end or not enough low end, come in here and mess around a little bit, somewhere around 50 hertz to around 70. If you pull that out, you can reduce some of that low end. So if I pull this around here, we're on about 55 hertz. Pretty tight Q overall. We'll pull that way down. Now the kick, much less of that low end there. Come back in here, just turn that off. More low end. Hard for me to hear because I'm wearing headphones, but if you're listening through studio monitors, you'll definitely hear that. And same thing for the individual drums too. If I turned all the effects off there and then all the effects off here, then listen, it's a much different sound. Back here, turn that back on, turn that back on. All right, and turn that back on. So just come in here and mess around with all of the effects to get to shape the sound any further that you need, okay? Sometimes you might want to turn things off, which is completely fine. Onto the cymbals, all of the cymbals, again, same concept as the kick, the snare, the toms, all the cymbals will go out to your main cymbal bus. So you can adjust the overall level of your cymbals with just one fader. Again, that's much easier than having to come in here. If you want to lower all of your cymbals, well, then you have to turn everything down. Yeah, I mean, sure, you could just select everything, which isn't too hard, but well, shift isn't working for me right now. I could control click all of these. Let me turn that off. You could select everything and then turn them down like that. That does make it a little bit easier, but I still think it's easier to just have everything go into one cymbal fader, because then I can also put compression on that if I want. I can EQ the entire cymbal sound. And as you see here, this compressor is not even on. I set up, there's actually a lot of effects that I'll set up through all of these presets that aren't even turned on because they're optional. If you want it, use it. If you don't, don't. I try to set everything up so you have sort of the tools there that you need or that you'll want, and you won't have to go through your effects here and try to load everything up. I try to have everything sort of there. All right, so all your cymbals go out. They're, of course, panned and whatnot to what I prefer. And by the way, if you're back to kit view, it's on drummer perspective right now. A lot of metal songs, a lot of metal records actually, are actually panned in the direction of the listener. So BFD3 makes this very, very easy for us. And by that, I mean, a lot of times, right now we're hearing the hat on the left, right? And you'll hear, say this floor tom way on the right. But in a metal record and in most songs, they might choose to pan the drums from the audience perspective. And that's kind of a pain to come in here and move everything around. Well, you don't have to in BFD3. Just click that audience button. It flips everything around. So now this same tom, even though it's still, I didn't mess with the panning. There we go. Now it's on the left, and the hi-hat would, of course, be on the right. So it's just real quick and easy to do that. But whenever, creating grooves and sounds, I personally like to feel like I'm in the driver's seat of the drums. Which, if you've never actually played drums, you should get behind a kit sometime, because all of this will make much more sense once you actually play drums. And then, of course, the ambient channel, I have that turned down a lot. Plenty of metal records have ambience and ambient sounds, of course, but sometimes you don't need as much as you think. Especially with raging guitars going on, it can get a little bit muddy if you have a ton of that ambient sound coming through. And of course, all of these have been sort of adjusted and trimmed, which of course you're free to come in here. Like, I really trim out a lot of the kick, because you don't want a lot of ambient kick sound going through your overheads or your room mics, because that's really going to make things muddy. Same thing for your snare, a lot of direct sound, not nearly as much in the overheads. Turn this down a little bit. But again, you're absolutely free to come in here and adjust whatever you want. There's your ambient mix. Of course, remember, you can always pop this stuff open, okay, and adjust things on the individual mics, like our snares and kicks, okay? And then we have this para-comp. That's parallel compression. The idea behind parallel compression is that you have an extremely compressed drum sound, and you mix that with a much less compressed drum sound. It just pumps everything up, So I'll mute it right now. And we'll turn it on. It's much more full of a sound. You can adjust that compressed sound as much as you want. If you want a lot of compression in there, go back here to the beginning. Or pull more in, or pull it out. All right, let's go to a different kit. We've been on this one long enough. We'll go to our log kit, or maybe our noose kit. I like this noose kit a lot here. Let's load this one up, and we'll finish the explanation about parallel compression with this new kit here. And here we are in the Noose X2 kit. This is the kit I told you about that had some of those metal sounds from percussion in there. Those can come in handy. Just hit play here. It's really easy to adjust your kick overall. Instead of having to mess around with two faders, just mess with one. You might hear some ring in that snare. That's because, believe it or not, in a lot of metal, maybe in solo here, you might say, well, I want to remove all that ring. Well, there's some metal kits out there where there's actually some ring, not an overbearing amount, of course, but there's a lot of ring in the snare. And the thing is, you really don't hear it because of all the cymbals going on, and especially because of the screaming going on, and because of the raging, thick guitar sound. And actually that ring that you hear, the little bit of ring out, can help the snare actually cut through a little bit. But, if you don't want it, pop in here, damp it up, man. Damp it up. There you go. That's all you got to do. All right. Same thing for our kicks. You can always damp those more if you want to. But this is put together basically the same way as our other kit that we looked at, as are all of the other presets here. They're all put together basically the same way, except in this one here, we just have the one snare. But back down here to our parallel compression, if I play again, mute that. So it's not as full, it's not as powerful in your face, Sounds good, more dynamic. Turn this on now. It's less dynamic overall, but it's more in your face. That's sometimes what you want. Again, because of those raging guitars that you're gonna have, those raging distorted guitars, usually recorded, double recorded, triple recorded, guitars on both sides, sometimes right down the middle too. You want something in your face that's really gonna stick out. So that's where parallel compression comes in. But again, if you want a more dynamic sound, you can just turn it down or mute it. And as far as how it works, in case you want to set up parallel compression for yourself, you just create an aux track, right? Which is what we did here, created an aux track. Then we did sins on absolutely everything across the bottom. Well, not every individual thing, but the kicks, it wouldn't make no sense really for me to do parallel compression for both of these, especially when they're going into the kicks. So we go from the kicks, the snare or the snare bus, if there is one, hi-hat, tom bus, tom reverb, so on and so forth. We'll go through, and actually looks like I missed one here. Probably want to put parallel compression on that tom verb as well. And of course, adjust the level and go through all of these here. And then we just have all of that, cymbals are sent, even the ambient mix is sent. And the reason I like to do it this way is because I have more control versus if I just came to the master, for example, went to the effects there and say I put a bus compressor on here. And there's a nice preset called In My Comp, which is basically parallel compression. It's just a really hard compression there. And then you could put this to 50% or right around 50%, and then you'd have your parallel compression. Okay. But again, there's much less control. You could, of course, dial it down or dial it up, dial it down, dial it up, but there's less control overall, which is why I don't do it this way. So here's the parallel compression track. This is what everything gets sent to. And then, of course, parallel compression gets sent out to the master where it gets blended with all of the effects up here. Distortion, you'll see distortion on a lot of things. It just that, those harmonics just can help things cut through a little bit, but always feel free to change things up however you want. Turn down the mix, turn up the mix, whatever you want. But back to the parallel compression on the sends, you have more control this way because you can adjust the amount that you're sending of each thing. So I have the kicks turned down a lot. Okay. And plus all of this is post fader. I was originally going to do this as post effects sources. So that way I could get the effects and then send a full signal and then just use this to sort of dial it in. But I figured that would be too, it's just too cumbersome for a lot of people. They don't want to dial with a bunch of, knobs every time. If you think, well, there's too much kick in my parallel compression or there's too much kick, what are you going to do? You're going to reach for a fader, right? You're going to say, let me just turn this down. Well, the thing is, if I had this on, this send here, if I had this on post effects or pre here, if I came here to, the faders here, and we were hitting the kick, and we said, well, we want to turn down our kick. I can turn down my kick all the way, and you're still going to hear it because of that send. We're sending it, in this case, post effects, but same thing's going to happen if it's pre effects. If it's on post fader, okay, well, let me go back to post effects first. If it's on just post effects or pre, and I wanted to turn down the kicks, instead of just being able to grab the fader, I'd actually have to come in to our sends and then turn it down here as well. A little bit cumbersome. So now you're not hearing anything. All right, so that's why I chose to do the way that I did. But if you want even more control, you can just do post effects or even pre. You can get really crazy with all of your routing and effects and whatnot. But I like post fader most of the time just because it's much easier. We can still change our send level here. So now we really have two send levels for each of these things going on because it's post fader. The fader is dictating how much is being sent out to our parallel compression. And at the same time, our send is dictating how much is sent out. You can almost think of this as a trim. Okay. But now that means I can simply grab the fader, turn it down because it's post fader. And now it turns off or turns down, the volume for our kick or whatever we happen to turn down. It turns that down for both the master and the parallel compression. Okay. So basically it turns down that send as well as what's going out to the master. All right. So that's parallel compression. You can always, as I said, come in and manipulate things in the sends, and of course here in the parallel compression track, up in the effects, you can see sometimes there'll be an EQ on the parallel compression track, sometimes there's not. High-low balance, sometimes I want to pull some of that low end out before we're hitting that really hard compressor. And of course the compressor's all the way up as well there, and it's really compressed. Ratio of 10, got the threshold pulled way down here. All right, so it's really, I mean, it's really, really, really compressing. If I play here, you can see it's really compressing. And then of course that gets sent out to the master. And of course it's going to get compressed again, because now I want to compress the sound of everything together, just to sort of, you know, glue it together a little bit. A little distortion on things, just to liven it up. And of course I'll limit it to really bring up the level of everything. As far as splitting these out to export into, maybe to record into your DAW, it is a little more complicated when you're set up like this in BFD3. But it's still completely possible. I mean, you can, you know, you have the option of splitting everything out if you want. You know, if you want each of these different drums, you can do that. If you just want the kick here, you can do that. By the kick, I mean the kick master. If there's a snare master, you can just get the snare master, or you can get each individual drum. It's pretty much the same thing. It just, you know, might be a little bit more confusing. So that's how all that works. And of course, same thing for export. You can go to export, just choose what options you want there and export everything. And I already have videos showing that, so we're not gonna go in that here. If you sort of have your snare reverb or something at the level you want, but you want it to be sort of a thicker sound overall, you could of course turn it up, and that's going to turn up the send as well. Another thing you could do is if you want it sort of at that level, you could always come to the send for that and just turn that up. Okay, that's a bit thicker, being compressed more. So that is how all of the drums are set up, how they're routed, and that you know, that holds true for everything. Let me come up here to this Dream T kit. This is a BFD3 only kit here. Let's load this up. All right, so here we are at the Dream T or Dreamt kit. Right, and as you can see, this is pretty much set up the same way. This one only has one snare, but of course the kicks are the same. This particular kick for this, you know, preset in this kit doesn't have a whole lot of topping click to it, but as you can tell, you know, everything else is set up pretty much the same as far as sends go, parallel compression, snare reverbs, tom reverbs, all that kind of stuff. All right. Same thing for effects, set up the same way, pretty much overall. So it's easy to understand no matter what you're loading up. All right, and like I said, man, these kits are really set up for you to be able to load up and then grab your guitar or whatever and just start to play without having to really tweak and tweak and tweak and tweak. But of course, just like any other kit or setting up your own kits, there's plenty you can do. You know, you can turn on tom resonance, you can come in and mess around with cymbal swell. If you want, you can of course adjust your levels all you want. You can change the way I have this set up, whatever you want to do there in these 23 different presets. If we head over to the groove editor, as I said, there's grooves. There'll be grooves, should be set up for most of these. And some of them will have drum tracks already loaded up too. Of course, assuming that you have that option checked whenever you load up, load up your stuff. If you load up a groove and you have a track selected there. And you can, as I think I mentioned, you can search those out with BenoniStudio there, the new ones for this here, or the previous pack that I also have, which you can just search my YouTube page and find that. There's a bunch of grooves that you can get. I actually like this kit here quite a bit. It's the BFD3 only kit as well. But one thing I will talk about is the kick and setting up your own metal sound, your own metal kick drum sound. If you're using just BFD3, if we come into the effects here, you can see I always remove a lot, somewhere around 275 to somewhere around 400, maybe 500. You know, that the area around about 350 can get really boxy in some presets that I have there. If I go to kick and I look for, say, one of the noose presets, you can see I pull a lot out, even around 164. So if I trigger that, it's of course going to sound different. But it's that 100 area, you'll find some power in that area. I should actually probably mute that one. All right, turn that off for now. You'll find a lot of power in that 100 area, but you don't want there to be too much. Same thing for the around 200 area to up to 300, but the 300 to 500 can get really boxy. So whenever you're setting up your metal kick drum sound, like that's not horrible, it's not horrible, but it might get a little boxy. If in here, see, I already have 500 out. If I pull that out, now that may work for you, it may not. But if you come here to somewhere around 300 and pull that up, not good sound there. Pull it down, clear out that boxiness, much better. But if I come to around 100 or so, and then I hit that, then I lose my power. And sometimes, some of these, you may listen to them without playing guitar. Let me actually switch this back to the one it's supposed to be on. That's close enough, actually. If you're actually playing some of these without playing guitar with it, you may think, well, that kick is too clicky or not clicky enough, or it's too much, not enough power, not enough low end, or too much low end, But get out your guitar, crank up an amp simulator or whatever, and play along, and you might be surprised to find out that it actually sounds great once everything else is layered in. That's why these were set up. These were set up to sound good with everything else playing. They're carved out to carve out those frequencies that commonly get in the way of a dense metal mix. But I just wanted to mention, some of those frequency ranges that you can look out for, specifically in metal. And another frequency range, which I already covered and mentioned, is the 50 hertz range. You'll get a lot. Let me turn this to a peak. You'll get a lot of low end in that 50 hertz range. That can be way too much. So if I go to 50, now if you have big speakers, you're hearing that and you're feeling the rumble. That could be too much. It can just get so muddy. So if there's too much of that, you can pull down somewhere around 50. It really depends on the sound you want. Pulling out around 50 sounds a little different than pulling out around 60 with a tight cue. You might want some of that rumble of the 50 to 55, but pull out some of that 60, and then it might sit, perfectly in the mix. But I don't want to get too deep into mixing. But that's a little better there. All right, but it sort of depends on what you want, overall. All right, but just look out for those frequency ranges as far as click goes overall. Let me turn both of these back on. Come over here to this and turn that one back on. As far as the click goes, you can find a click somewhere between 1,000 and really even 11,000 sometimes. That's a little high, but maybe 9,000. Sometimes you want more of a clicky sound around, around 1,000 or so. You want a bit more of that sort of a click. And it's going to sound different depending on the drum and, of course, the frequencies that drum has. But sometimes if it's really clicky up high, look for somewhere around 7 or 8. And you might want to just dip that down and get to be less clicky. But of course, always do the twist and boost and then cut. Go into a frequency range, boost your gain, set up a palette or a track to start playing, which let's just solo this. And then if we just play, and then just start twisting your frequency to find out where the click is. That's annoying to you. Once you find it, so I actually like that click, but say you don't like it, turn it down. All right. That's the sort of boost and cut method. But up there around 8, as you can hear, that gets really clicky. And sometimes that clicky gets annoying. So you might want to dip some of that out if it's too clicky. Because like I said, sometimes you want that lower click. I mean, that's really popular in metal now, is that sort of lower range. When I say lower, it's still upper range, but somewhere around 1,000 to 2,000 to 3,000. that click down there sounds so much different than the old time click that you might have gotten in some of those early metal records where it was literally just tick, 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 tick. And they basically carved out that low end. They carved out around 100. They carved out around 50. They even carved out around 300 and 400. And you were just left with tick, 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 and no power, right? We don't like to do that today. I mean, at least I don't. But look for that click somewhere up, you know, probably between 4 to 8 to 4 to 9. Okay, but there's also click, depending on the drum, somewhere between 1,000 and 8,000. So you just have to go through there and just find out what it is. Now, lastly, I'll just mention on the snare, you want to be careful, especially in metal, about cutting out too much around 250, 240, 250, 260 up to 300 or so. You want to be really careful about that because, let's put this on solo. If I cut out, right, just turn that off. We're not affecting it a lot right now, but let me check my frequencies right here. So 272, actually I have a bit of a boost. If I had cut out somewhere around, let's go to about 240 or so. There's a lot of power in the snare around this 200 range, the mid 200 range. If I pull that out, I'm losing that power. I'm losing that initial hit, right? Let's pull this back up. That may be too much for you, but you can of course always adjust it. Much better with that, you know, mid 200 range pulled up. All right, much more power in that hit. All right, so if you want to cut some in the snare because it's just getting too muddy, you can go somewhere around the low hundreds or so. Of course, I'm not going to tell you how to mix. You can do whatever you want, but you can pull out some of the real low end, you know, 100 and down. Just cut some of that out so it doesn't conflict with the bass. It doesn't conflict with the guitars. It doesn't conflict with the kick drum. Load this kit here because I happen to like this vein kit. All right, and this kit is using one of the snares from Metal Snares, I do believe. That's our sonar process snare, which is included with Metal Snares, which I, you know, highly suggest you check out. They're not necessarily for metal the style, but they're literally metal snares. Okay, and we're using, in this case, we're using one kick from Oblivion and then one from Sphere. And of course, those are layered together. All right, and of course, I have one pitched down just a bit in this case. And this one here is, of course, standard. Of course, trim on the trigger. I pulled the trim out all the way because, you know, that's what a trigger is. It's you don't want any ambience on the trigger mostly, but you can, of course, do whatever you want. So I just solo just the trigger sound. I mean, that's fine on its own. You know, you may find at times just one kick is fine, and that's perfectly all right. You can just mute one, turn one down, readjust the ratio, whatever you want, whatever you happen to like. I just like that layered sound. It's a little more complex, but if I just wanted just maybe this one here, just mute that one. There you go. Of course, always come into the effects. This EQ here isn't even on. I just sort of included it in case you wanted to turn it on and further manipulate the sound. But as you can see, somewhere around that 400 range, that 440, pulled a lot out around there. And then also down here for this one, around 150, I had to pull some out. But you want to be careful. It really sort of depends on what kind of samples you're working with, but you don't want to pull too much out around that 100 range. If you're just using one kick anyway, because you might lose some of that power, that initial hit in the low end. But since we're stacking samples, as you can see here with our trigger, we're not really pulling that much out in that 100 range. So we're sort of using the layer in the 100, that 150 area of the frequency to come from this trigger, while some of the other frequency ranges come from this one, this kick. And of course, this one here is off, but you can always turn that one on if you want to further manipulate that sound. Okay, so this kit actually sounds pretty good with just one. That's actually the wrong. Go here to grooves and come down here to vein. It's not too far off. Let me put this on 135. There we go. So it sounds all right with just that one kick. We can layer it up. A little bit better. Maybe just that one. course, adjust the ratio, level. So that this kit can really dig you a great sounding track. That really made no sense, but maybe you get the inside joke. You'll hear on this one, I have the cymbals pulled down. I have the ambience pulled down. So we're getting a lot of that direct sound and not too much, of the cymbals. So it's not too washy, too wishy-washy, too high-end, whatever. It sounds really good. As soon as you grab your guitar and just start playing, it sounds really good. Okay, so that's pretty much all you need to know about this pack of drums. Again, you're getting 23 overall presets. 13 of them are BFD3 only. Okay, and the other 10 you'll need expansion packs. Of course, you can always load them up and just switch out the drums that you don't have if you want. All right, so that's also an option. Of course, you're getting the grooves too. There's 182 grooves, and there's 5 different palettes. This folder right here is what you'll get after you unzip it. Again, you can just put these on any hard drive you want, and then scan the path in BFD3, or you can drag them in, or you can use the file menu, import them, whatever you want. To pull those in, right now it is free. So that is the Benoni BFD3 Signature Metal Pack, containing grooves and presets for FXpansion's BFD3. Go download it right now.